I really enjoyed the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, the precision and ceremony of the Trooping of the Colour on Horse Guards Parade, the crowds on the Mall, and the appearance of the royal family on the palace balcony for the flypast. And I also enjoyed taking part in our own garden party, drinking tea, or possibly Prosecco, on the lawn, waving flags, and even singing Land of Hope and Glory, however problematic that song is. It felt good to be connected to all the people celebrating a long-lived and much-loved monarch. It felt good to recall some of the proud traditions of our country. It felt good to be British. But you don't have to look very far to realise that while there are some really good things associated with this country, both now and historically, there are also some really bad ones. Stamping the British flag across the globe did involve a lot of stamping. And this is not a uniquely British phenomenon, of course. Pretty well every country would probably have to say the same, that while there is much to celebrate in their country and its history, there is also much to be ashamed of. And one thing that we have to look back on with shame is our treatment of people with mental illnesses. Now, it's true that Britain had one of the first hospitals specifically for people with mental illnesses, the Royal Bethlehem Hospital in London, popularly known as Bedlam. But it was chronically underfunded, and it raised funds through encouraging public visiting, not to help care for the inmates, but to be entertained by them. It became one of the sights of London in the 17th and 18th centuries, so that visitors would go and visit the Tower of London, maybe a theatre, and the Bedlam Hospital. One visitor wrote this: "You find yourself in a long and wide gallery, on either side of which are a large number of little cells, where lunatics of every description are shut up, and you can get a sight of these poor creatures, little windows being let into the doors. On the second floor is a corridor and cells like those on the first floor, and this is the part reserved for dangerous maniacs, most of them being chained and terrible to behold. On holidays, numerous persons of both sexes, but belonging generally to the lower classes, visit this hospital and amuse themselves watching these unfortunate wretches, who often give them cause for laughter." Now, I mention this not merely to shock, though it is shocking, but because it provides such a contrast with the encounter recorded by Luke in today's Gospel reading, an encounter with another man who was chained and terrible to behold. Although in the Gospel it is explained in terms of demon possession, according to the understanding of the time, Jesus meets a man with what was obviously a severe mental illness, a man who would have been confined in a second-floor cell if he had been in Bedlam. Here he is kept among the tombs, in the place of death, as he has no place among the living. But instead of laughing at him, Jesus treats him with compassion. He approaches him and he asks him his name. And that in itself is such a powerful statement. This man is not just a patient or a case, but an identifiable individual, a person with a name. And then Jesus heals him. I find the description of the man after he's been healed an intensely moving one. There he was, clothed and in his right mind. This is something that we all take for granted. It's just part of normality for us. Now, I don't know the exact circumstances in which you are listening, but you are probably clothed and in your right mind. But for years, this man had not even had the dignity of clothing, and he must have been absolutely terrified of the violent forces which seemed to be in control of his body. To see him sitting quietly with Jesus, sharing ordinary human contact, as you or I might have done, is a powerful image of wholeness, of shalom, the deep peace of God. What Jesus does in this story is to find a state of disorder and to bring it back to order. God's creation in the beginning was orderly. We're told in the opening chapter of Genesis that at each stage of creation, God saw that it was good. It was well ordered. It was the way it was meant to be. And we are told in the first chapter of John's Gospel that Jesus himself was part of that original creation. Without him, not one thing came into being. So when Jesus finds such obvious disorder, he restores the man to the way he was meant to be, made in the image of God. Well, that was then, and this is now. In his earthly ministry, Jesus could exert his miraculous power to heal, to bring order to situations of chaos. He still can, but now he mostly works through us, his followers, which gives us quite a big responsibility. So where do we encounter disorder, I wonder? Perhaps in some of the circumstances of our own lives, or in our families. Maybe in other people we know whose lives are disordered. We may feel that we encounter disorder in the life of the church, at local or national level. And it's certainly something we often encounter in working life. If we look at public life, well, where do we begin? We can easily spot disorder where there should be order, not least among those who are elected to govern us. The invasion of one country by another may, I think, be classed as a disorderly act. And man-made climate change is a terrible sign of the disorder that we inflict on the world through our greed and thoughtlessness. And in all these situations, where we would want Jesus to bring his healing touch, he calls us to stand in his place, as individuals and as a church. It seems to me that he calls us, first of all, to a work of perception. We need to look carefully at ourselves, at others, and at the world, and try to discern where there is disorder. And then we need to offer ourselves to help bring order, the rule of God, into those situations. Sometimes it takes a lot of courage to call out what we perceive to be disordered, and we may not be thanked for it, as Archbishop Justin Welby and a number of bishops have found in challenging the government's migrant deportation policy. There's no blueprint for this. We don't have miraculous powers. But merely to accept disorder, let alone to enjoy it or be amused by it, is not an option. As always, prayer is the beginning and the end of our response to the world's needs. And through prayer, through standing consistently and visibly on the side of the right, and where necessary, through positive and courageous speech and action, we can make a difference and help bring order to a disordered world.